I cried alone after failing my interview. She bought me coffee without asking why. I failed the interview. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Outside. Chicago wind cut through my thin blazer. I sat on the curb and cried. Alone. A stranger crouched beside me, holding out a coffee. You don't have to explain, she said quietly. I looked up into the calmest eyes I'd ever seen. 3 months later. Everything I loved was on fire. And I still don't know if I'd choose differently. My name is Jordan Reyes, 26. An architect who grew up in a house where ambition mattered more than feelings, and secrets were simply never spoken aloud. That October afternoon in Chicago, I had just lost the only job offer that mattered. And I had no idea a coffee shop would change my entire life. The woman who handed me coffee wore a green apron and paint-stained sneakers, like she belonged to some gentler, unhurried world I'd forgotten existed. Wren's Nest, she said, nodding toward the shop behind her. Best seats by the window. Cry as long as you need. I laughed despite myself, wiping my face with my sleeve, embarrassed that a stranger had witnessed my worst afternoon in years. Her name was Alex Whitfield. She didn't ask why I was crying, didn't offer hollow encouragement, just sat with me in silence. I came back the next day, telling myself it was for the coffee, though we both knew that wasn't the whole truth. Alex remembered my order before I finished ordering it, and something about being remembered, truly seen, undid me a little. We started talking about nothing: architecture, Chicago winters, her grandmother's old recipes, until nothing became ours neither of us noticed passing. I hadn't told anyone how badly the rejection had hurt, but somehow, sitting across from Alex, I didn't need to explain. She sketched buildings on napkins while I talked, casual doodles that were somehow better than anything in my portfolio. You should open your own firm, she said one evening, like it was obvious. Like failure was just a detour, not an ending. I started visiting every day after job hunting, and Wren's Nest became less an escape and more a place I wanted to be. One rainy night she walked me to the train, and I felt something unfamiliar: hope, maybe, or the beginning of wanting someone. Weeks passed, and Wren's Nest became my second home, its chalkboard menu and mismatched chairs more familiar than my own apartment. Alex asked about my family once, carefully, and I gave her the rehearsed version: successful parents, high expectations, nothing about the parts one hid. My mother called that week, asking about job prospects, never once asking how I felt, only how things looked from the outside. I didn't mention Alex to her, not because there was anything to hide yet, but because some habits of silence run deep. Alex taught me to make pour-over coffee, standing close behind me, correcting my grip on the kettle with careful, deliberate patience. I noticed the small things then, how her laugh started in her eyes before reaching her mouth, how she remembered everyone's name. We began closing the shop together some nights, sweeping floors and talking about dreams neither of us had said out loud before. I want to design buildings people actually want to live in, I told her, and she looked at me like she believed it completely. Alex mentioned she'd inherited the shop from her grandmother, Ruth, who'd raised her after her parents divorced when she was young. I started noticing I dressed differently on the days I knew I'd see her. Told myself it was nothing. Knew it wasn't. A friend from my old firm, Priya, teased me about the coffee girl, and I laughed it off, though my face gave me away. Priya had been my closest friend since college, sharp and loyal, but she'd also known my family long enough to worry for me. Be careful, Priya warned once, gently. Your mom still thinks you're dating that guy from church. You know that? Right. I hadn't corrected my mother's assumption about the man from church, mostly because correcting it meant admitting something I wasn't ready to. Alex and I started meeting outside the shop, a gallery opening, a walk along the lake, dinner that stretched long past dessert. She told me about her father, Richard. A successful architect who'd cut contact years ago after she chose the coffee shop over his firm. I didn't ask which firm. Some part of me wasn't ready to know. And another part sensed I already did. One night, walking along Lake Michigan, Alex stopped mid-sentence and just looked at me, like she was memorizing something important. "I like you," she said finally. Simply. No dramatics. Just quiet honesty that landed heavier than any grand declaration could have. I didn't answer with words. I kissed her instead. Right there by the water. Terrified and certain in the same breath. We stood there a long moment after. Foreheads together. Both of us laughing softly at how long we'd pretended otherwise. Being with Alex felt less like falling and more like finally exhaling after holding my breath for 26 years. I met her grandmother Ruth that weekend. A sharp, funny woman who studied me like she was deciding whether I'd earned my seat at her table. "You make my granddaughter smile more," Ruth said bluntly. Pouring tea. "That's all I need to know about you, dear." I hadn't felt that kind of easy acceptance from an older woman before, and it made something in my chest ache with longing. Alex and I kept things quiet at first. Not from shame, but because we wanted this to belong only to us for a while. We spent Sunday mornings reading in her cramped apartment above the shop. Her cat asleep across both our laps like a small anchor. I started imagining a future I'd never let myself picture before, one with softness in it, with someone who chose me back. My mother invited me to a family dinner, mentioning offhand that the Chun family's son, David, would also be attending, just to talk. I went, mostly to keep the peace, and spent the entire dinner distracted, texting Alex under the table like a nervous teenager. "You seemed far away tonight," my mother said afterward, studying me the way she did when she suspected something she couldn't name. I told her I was just tired from job hunting, which was true, though it wasn't the whole truth she deserved. Alex and I celebrated 3 months quietly. Just us. Cheap wine and takeout. And it felt more real than any anniversary I'd known. I finally told Priya everything about Alex. About the kiss by the lake. About how happy I'd been afraid to admit I was. Priya hugged me tight. Genuinely thrilled. But her eyes carried a worry she didn't quite hide when she asked about my parents. "They'll come around," I said. Though I wasn't sure I believed it. Mostly because I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. Alex started mentioning me to her staff. Introducing me easily. Like there was nothing to explain. Nothing to soften or hide. I envied that ease sometimes. The way she moved through the world without the constant calculation I'd learned from childhood. We started reviewing my portfolio ideas together. Alex sketching wild concepts on napkins that somehow found their way into my actual designs. "Open your own firm," she said again. More seriously this time. "I'll be your first investor. I believe in you completely." I laughed. But the idea took root somewhere quiet inside me, growing alongside everything else I was slowly allowing myself to want. One evening she mentioned her father's firm by name, casually, and the floor seemed to tilt slightly beneath my feet. Whitfield and Associates. The very firm that had rejected me 3 months earlier. The interview that started everything between us. I said nothing that night, telling myself it didn't matter. That the connection was coincidence. That nothing needed to change. But I started noticing how carefully Alex avoided discussing her father. How the subject closed like a door whenever it opened. I decided to let it go for now, unwilling to disturb something so fragile and good with questions I wasn't ready for. We spent a weekend upstate. Just the two of us. Hiking trails and cooking badly over a small rented cabin stovetop. Lying beside her that night, thought, clearly and simply, that I loved her. Though I wasn't brave enough to say it yet. Alex traced my jaw in the dark and whispered that she'd never felt this steady with anyone. That I made silence feel safe. I fell asleep happier than I'd been in years, not knowing how soon that quiet happiness would be tested. My mother called with news. David had asked about me again, and she'd already told him I'd have dinner with him Friday. It's just dinner, she said. When I hesitated. You're 26. Jordan. People are starting to talk about why you're still single. I didn't go. Claiming a work deadline. And spent that Friday instead at Wren's Nest. Guilt sitting heavy beside my happiness. Alex noticed my mood. Asked gently what was wrong. And I found myself unable to explain the two separate lives I was living. Is there someone else you're hiding from? She asked once. Only half joking. And I laughed too quickly. Too nervously. To be convincing. I told her about David. Framing it as harmless family noise. But I didn't tell her how often my mother brought his name up. Alex went quiet for a moment. Then asked carefully whether I was ashamed of us. Of what we were building together. Never, I said immediately. And meant it. Though my actions hadn't matched my words in weeks. And we both knew it. A recruiter from Whitfield and Associates called, offering me a second interview, saying leadership had reconsidered after reviewing revised portfolios. I told Alex, expecting relief or excitement, but her face went carefully blank, the way it did whenever her father came up. My father runs that firm, she finally admitted, voice tight. I should have told you sooner. I just didn't want it to matter. The pieces clicked into place, the rejection, the coffee, the coincidence that hadn't been coincidence at all. Not entirely. Not really. Did you know who I was? That first day. Asked, and the hurt in my voice surprised even me as I said it. No, she said firmly. I found out later. When you mentioned the interview address. I should have told you. I'm sorry. I believed her. Mostly. But a small cold doubt settled in my chest anyway. The kind that doesn't fully leave once it arrives. We fought for the first time that night. Quietly. Painfully. Both of us saying things meant to protect ourselves more than each other. Maybe you should take the job, Alex said finally. Exhausted. I won't be the reason you don't get what you've worked for. I left angry. Though I wasn't sure at her or at the tangled mess of timing and family that had found its way into us. Priya listened to the whole story, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. What are you actually going to tell your mother? I didn't have an answer. And the not knowing followed me home. Sat with me through a sleepless, restless night alone. The next day, I went to the second interview at Whitfield and Associates, telling myself it was just professional, just an opportunity. Richard Whitfield interviewed me himself, sharp-eyed and precise, asking pointed questions about ambition, sacrifice, and what I was willing to give up. He mentioned his daughter briefly, Fan, calling her a disappointment who chose a coffee cart over a career, and something in me went cold. I didn't correct him. Didn't defend Alex. Sat frozen instead. Ashamed of my silence the moment I stepped back outside. I got the job offer that afternoon, senior associate. Real money. Real prestige. Everything I'd once believed would finally make my mother proud. I didn't tell Alex right away. Carrying the offer like a stone in my pocket. Unsure which parts of my life it would crush. My mother was thrilled when I mentioned the offer. Already planning how to announce it at church. Already imagining the version of me she wanted. This is what matters, she said. Stability. Respect. A future David's family would be proud to be part of. I finally told her. Carefully. That David and I weren't a possibility. That I wasn't interested in him or any man like that. She paused, studying me too closely, and asked, quiet and sharp, is there someone else? Jordan, just tell me the truth. I panicked and said no. The lie leaving my mouth before I could stop it. And I hated myself instantly for the ease of it. That night I told Alex about the job offer. Watching her face carefully for a reaction she tried hard to hide. Take it, she said again. Too fast. Too final. It's what you wanted before any of this. Before me. Don't do that, I said. Don't make this about you sacrificing something. I get to decide what I want, not you. We didn't resolve it. Just went quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like distance even when you're sitting close together. Priya came over that weekend, finding me surrounded by unopened offer paperwork, and asked plainly if I was happy at Wren's Nest. I've never been happier, I admitted, and saying it out loud made the choice ahead of me feel suddenly, terrifyingly clear. I turned down the offer the next morning, calling the recruiter before I could talk myself out of the decision. Richard Whitfield called personally, surprised, asking if it was about money, unable to imagine another reason someone would refuse him. It's not about money, I said simply, and hung up before he could ask the question I wasn't ready to answer. I told Alex what I'd done, and relief broke across her face before guilt quickly followed it. Worried I'd sacrificed too much. I didn't do it for you, I clarified. I did it because Wren's Nest is where I actually want to be. Things felt steadier after that. Softer. Until my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Tuesday evening. She'd heard, through a family friend at church, that I'd declined a prestigious job offer for some coffee shop nonsense. Explain this to me, she demanded, standing in my doorway. And I felt every careful lie I'd told start to unravel at once. I opened my mouth to explain the career choice, and somehow, unplanned, unrehearsed, the truth about Alex came tumbling out instead. I'm seeing someone, I said. Her name is Alex. She's not a phase. And I'm not confused. I'm happy. Mom. My mother went very still, color draining from her face. And for a long moment she said absolutely nothing at all. This isn't who I raised, she finally said, voice shaking, and walked out before I could find any words to stop her. I sat alone in my apartment afterward, phone in hand, unsure whether to call Alex, Priya, or no one at all. My mother didn't call for 2 weeks, a silence heavier than any argument could have been, each day sharpening my guilt. Alex noticed the shift in me immediately, holding me while I cried, promising things would eventually settle, though neither of us believed it fully. Priya mentioned, carefully. That word had spread at church. Someone had seen me and Alex holding hands at a downtown restaurant. I felt sick, imagining the whispers reaching my mother before I could control the narrative, before I could soften any of it. My father called instead of my mother, voice flat, asking if this was a phase or something I intended to keep doing. It's not a phase, Dad, I said quietly. It's just who I am. I'm still the same person you raised. He didn't respond with anger, only silence. Then a quiet, give your mother time, before ending the call abruptly. Richard Whitfield, meanwhile, discovered through mutual acquaintances that his daughter was dating the architect who turned down his offer. He showed up unannounced at Wren's Nest, cold and controlled, informing Alex the building's lease, held through the family trust, would not renew. You're punishing me for loving someone, Alex said, voice breaking. But he simply repeated the lease terms and walked out. I found her that evening surrounded by paperwork, terrified, calculating months of savings against the sudden loss of everything she'd built. This is because of me, I said, guilt swallowing me whole. And Alex shook her head fiercely, refusing to let me carry that alone. This is because of him, she corrected. Don't you dare apologize for something that was never actually your fault. We searched for new locations together late into the night, though the numbers never quite worked, never quite matched what she could afford. My mother finally called, asking to meet, and I arrived expecting reconciliation, bracing myself for something gentler than what actually happened. I spoke with David's mother, she said instead. There's still time to fix this, Jordan, if you're willing to try. There's nothing to fix, I said, quieter than I felt. I'm not confused. And I'm not going to pretend for anyone. She left the restaurant crying, and I sat alone afterward, wondering how many more conversations would end exactly this way. Priya called, distraught, admitting she'd mentioned Alex's name to my mother weeks ago, not realizing how much damage it would cause. I thought she already knew, Priya said, guilt-stricken. I never meant to be the one who told her before you could. I wasn't angry. Exactly. Just exhausted. The kind of tired that settles into your bones after months of managing everyone else's reactions. Alex and I found a smaller space across town, cheaper but promising, though signing the lease meant emptying nearly all her savings. We'll make it work, she said, forcing brightness into her voice that didn't quite reach the worry still visible in her eyes. I offered to help financially, and she refused instantly, proud and stubborn, insisting this was something she needed to rebuild herself. We argued about it. Not cruelly, but with the particular frustration of two people scared for the same thing in different ways. Ruth, Alex's grandmother, showed up at the new space unannounced, quietly handing over an envelope of cash without explanation or argument. Family helps family, Ruth said simply, cutting off Alex's protest. That includes Jordan now. Don't be stubborn about accepting love. I watched Alex cry in her grandmother's arms and understood, fully, what real unconditional family could actually look like. My own family gathered for Thanksgiving that year, and my mother invited me, carefully avoiding any mention of Alex in the invitation. I asked if I could bring her, and my mother went silent on the phone for so long I thought the call had dropped. Not this year, she finally said. Please, Jordan. Just this once. Come alone. Give me time to adjust to this. I agonized over it for days, torn between respecting her fragile boundary and refusing to hide the person I loved most. Alex told me to go, gently insisting our relationship didn't need a public debut at a dinner clearly not ready for it. Thanksgiving was tense and quiet, my relatives asking careful questions, my mother deflecting every mention of my personal life with practiced ease. My grandmother pulled me aside afterward, studying my face with unnerving clarity, and asked simply, "Are you happy? Truly happy?" "I am," I told her, bracing for judgment that never came, only a long, thoughtful nod and a squeeze of my hand. "Then that's what matters," she said quietly. "I loved a woman once, before your grandfather. Different times. I never got to choose." Her confession stunned me into silence. Decades of hidden history suddenly reframing everything I thought I understood about my family. "Does Mom know?" asked, and my grandmother shook her head. "Some doors stay closed, but yours doesn't have to. Jordan." I left Thanksgiving with more hope than I'd expected, carrying my grandmother's quiet blessing like something fragile and precious. The new coffee shop space, Ren's Corner, opened 3 weeks later, smaller but warm, filled with regulars who'd followed Alex across town. Business was slow at first, money tight enough that Alex took a second job some evenings just to cover the difference. I started designing pro bono renovation plans for the new space, determined to help in the one way she couldn't refuse. Richard Whitfield appeared once more, this time at my old firm's networking event, cornering me near the exit unexpectedly. "You could still have that career," he said. "If you walked away from my daughter, doors would open again. Think carefully." "I have thought about it," I said evenly, "and I choose her. That's not a difficult decision for me anymore." He left without another word, and I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph exactly, just quiet, solid certainty. My mother texted that night, unprompted, asking simply how the coffee shop opening had gone. The first gentle question in months. I answered honestly, hopeful. And she replied with a single line, "I'd like to see it sometime, if that's all right." I stared at the message a long time, unsure whether to trust this small, careful crack of light breaking through. My mother visited Wren's Corner on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, standing awkwardly near the door until I noticed and waved her over. Alex greeted her warmly despite everything, offering coffee and an easy smile that slowly, visibly, softened my mother's guarded posture. They talked for nearly an hour, careful and polite at first, then gradually easier, discovering shared opinions about renovation and old buildings. Watching them together, something loosened in my chest that had been tight for months, a held breath finally allowed to release. My mother left with a hug for me, brief but real, and a quiet promise to try harder, in her own way. 2 weeks later, disaster struck. Faulty wiring in the building's old walls sparked overnight, and the shop caught fire before anyone noticed. I got the call at 3 a.m., Alex's voice shaking, and I was out the door before she'd finished the sentence. By the time I arrived, firefighters had contained the blaze, but half the shop's interior was smoke-damaged and unusable. Insurance uncertain. Alex stood outside in the cold, shaking, watching years of rebuilding disappear into charred wood and broken glass before us. "I can't lose this too," she whispered, and I held her tightly, refusing to let go even as ash settled on our shoulders. The next morning, word spread fast through the neighborhood, and regulars began showing up unprompted, offering help before we even asked. Priya organized a fundraiser within days, and my mother, unexpectedly, matched the first significant donation without telling me beforehand. "I wanted to help," she said simply. When I asked why, "She matters to you." "That makes her matter to me too." Richard Whitfield, hearing about the fire, arrived at the wreckage looking older than I remembered, quiet in a way I hadn't seen before. He offered to cover the remaining repair costs, no conditions attached, and Alex stared at him, too stunned to answer immediately. "I don't understand," Alex said carefully. "You wanted this place gone. Why help save it now?" "Because I was wrong," he said, voice rough. "About the shop. About you. I've had time to think. And I'm sorry." It wasn't a full reconciliation. Not yet. But it was a door opening after years of being firmly, deliberately shut. Rebuilding took 2 months. Community volunteers and family alike showing up on weekends, sanding floors and repainting walls together. I designed the renovation myself. My actual portfolio. My actual name on real blueprints for the first time since leaving my old firm. My mother came by most Saturdays, quietly helping paint trim, never mentioning church or David again. Simply present. Simply trying. The night before reopening, Alex and I stood alone in the finished space, exhausted, paint splattered, and quietly, completely happy. "I almost lost everything," she said softly. "And somehow I ended up with more than I ever thought I'd have." I told her then, finally, the words I'd been carrying for months. "I love you." I should have said it sooner. "I know," she said, laughing through sudden tears. "I've known for a while. I just needed you to catch up." Reopening day drew a crowd larger than either of us expected. Neighbors, regulars, my parents, Ruth, even Richard Whitfield standing quietly near the back. My mother pulled me aside before the ribbon cutting, squeezing my hand tightly, and said, "I'm proud of you." I should have said that months ago. "Thank you," I said, voice thick, understanding that some apologies arrive slowly, in pieces, and that was still enough for me. I looked around the crowded shop, family, friends, strangers who'd become community, and realized how much had changed since that first cup of coffee. Alex found my hand in the crowd, lacing our fingers together openly, publicly, without hesitation, without any need to hide anymore. Someone cheered when they noticed, and Alex just laughed, unbothered, squeezing my hand tighter as the ribbon finally, officially, dropped. Richard approached us afterward, awkward but sincere, offering Alex a small, Formal apology and an invitation to dinner sometime soon. Maybe, Alex said. Cautious but not unkind. One step at a time. Dad. That's all I can offer right now. I thought about the version of myself who'd cried alone on that curb, terrified and unseen, and barely recognized her anymore. That version had been so certain love meant hiding, meant choosing between family and truth, meant sacrificing herself to be accepted. I knew now that wasn't true, that the people who truly loved you eventually found their way toward acceptance, however slowly, however imperfectly. Standing in that rebuilt shop, surrounded by everyone who mattered, I finally understood what my grandmother meant about choosing yourself. 6 months later, Alex and I moved into a small apartment above Wren's Corner, our life quietly, finally, entirely our own. I still think about that stranger who once handed me coffee without asking why. She gave me far more than she ever knew. Fendi.